And we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regular board meeting for January 27th, 2021. And before we begin, I'd like to recognize this meeting is taking place in various locations throughout Coast Salish territory, and I know that I'm thankful to be here. With that, we will get underway. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda, Ms. Legault?
None.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Toporowski. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on, Ms. Legault.
Thank you. Adoption of the regular board meeting minutes of January 13th, 2021, and I would like to bring a correction to the board's attention in Resolution 21-21.3. The function number stated was 279 community parks, and it should be function 280 regional parks.
So with that correction, if I can have a motion to adopt the minutes as amended, moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on, Ms. Legault.
No business arising from the minutes, so on to public input period. We have one submission. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This is from Susan Kaufman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'd like to provide input on item SR3, virtual meetings and live public participation. I'd like to thank staff for the report and hope the board will endorse the recommendations of option 1, but seek clarification of the following items. Item A, in the event of significant public interest agenda items, how will the extended public input submissions be accommodated as per the public input policy? That is, extending the length of public input by 2/3 majority vote. Also applicable to question period as noted above. And in item D, concern that if public input participation is by video only, not everyone has access to internet and or are available during daytime meetings. That written submissions be sent directly to members as opposed to being read out loud. While public input is meant for the directors, it also benefits the public to hear from others within the community and suggest reading written submissions if time allows. Mr. Chair, at one time, the chair of the meetings could refer questions received from the public to staff members or allow the directors to provide comment. Over time, that evolved to having only the chair respond to questions. Some chairs are quite well informed and provide answers, while some unfortunately do not. Whether by inexperience or lack of knowledge, this leads to a less than satisfactory experience for the members of the public participating in question period, and hopefully this practice will be reviewed. I'd like to thank all those who chair the CVRD meetings. Not an easy job. It is greatly appreciated when a chair does acknowledge the participation by members of the public in both public input and question period. And that concludes public input.
Thank you very much. And we always appreciate input from the public, and we've done, I think, as we're looking forward to doing as much as we possibly can to enable that input. And we'll discuss that when the item comes up. Ms. Legault.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring the delegations into the meeting. So item D1 is a delegation. George Parker, Director of Planning, GP Rollo and Associates, and John Horn, Couch and Housing, regarding the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and this is for information.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Parker, and I believe I see Mr. Horn here as well. Is that the contingent of your delegation presentation today, Mr. Parker?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. So welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for this work. Obviously, John hears it enough from us, so I'm not going to say it to him, but George, thank you so much for all your work on this project, and I know we're excited to review the information in the PowerPoint, so please go ahead.
Great. I'm going to share my screen now, since I have the PowerPoint here. Does that look good?
It's good.
Okay, excellent. And John will take it from the top.
Okay, that's the first act, so to speak. So good afternoon and thanks for having us. My name is John Horn from Couch and Housing Association. And of course, I'm here with George Parker from GP Rollo to present the results of the CVRD Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So we wanted to begin by acknowledging that this work took place in the traditional territories of Cowichan tribes, the Didigat First Nation, the Hualt First Nation, Wyaxin First Nation, Malahad, Penelakut, Cheminis, Subatsit, First Nation, Pacachin First Nation, amongst others. And we're grateful to the housing staff from those First Nations who shared their knowledge during this project. We also want to thank more than 250 community members who shared their ideas and their lived experience, and the long list of stakeholders who participated in interviews or attended one of our housing community cafes. We want to just thank them. Without their input, this report would not have been possible. The one we're presenting today is one of a family of reports. Of course, we're presenting on the overall CBRD regional housing needs assessment today, but the work also includes 13 sub-regional reports in which we'll be presenting those at future dates to specific meetings of the CBRD and the municipalities, etc. So the presentation today begins with the qualitative findings, and we're kind of an overview of our engagement activities, the key themes we heard from the community, and key findings by population group. Then George will take us through the quantitative findings, including the information on background research, housing price trends, affordability, and projections. So from our perspective, we just wanted to give you a bit of an overall view of the community engagement and the engagement process and some of the outcomes associated with that. So our engagement process included a Place Speak questionnaire, which ran through September and October, and we received about 250 responses to that questionnaire. We held 3 virtual community cafes, which brought together about 16 organizations, including the health authorities, community service organizations, schools, chambers of commerce, etc. Each community cafe that we held had a specific theme, and there were 3 themes altogether: housing and health, housing and youth/families, and then housing and the economy. We reached out also to 33 organizations for interviews, including community organizations, housing providers, and developers. And we interviewed housing managers at 8 First Nations. And so that's an overview of the engagement that took place. And from that, a couple of key themes emerged. You'll see them there, and I'll just speak briefly to them and just say that on the first theme, our engagement feedback we got during our engagement really does confirm that the demand on housing and the rising prices we're seeing are not likely to change in the next 5 years. There's lots of topics about housing size, and one aspect of that is that seniors looking to downsize, and they're looking for smaller and more affordable units. The third, no surprise to anybody, the Cowichan Valley is home to an aging population. One of the aspects of that is that rising maintenance costs and mobility needs are a concern for seniors, and they're really looking for options in which they can age in place. On the other end of the spectrum, younger generations have housing challenges, and they shared concerns about housing instability and unaffordability, really, for youth and for young families. There is an acute shortage of rental housing. We all know that. This is especially true in the electoral areas, and for young people, Indigenous people, and those with mental health challenges, singles and seniors. So a fairly broad section of the community is experiencing the impact of having that acute shortage of rental housing. The housing prices and the costs are really, we're seeing those that they're misaligned with regional wages. And one of the outcomes of that we see is that people are locating where housing is available rather than where they would prefer to live. And what that really does is it just pushes their transportation costs up quite a bit higher. So that's one aspect that maybe gets missed sometimes, but when your wages don't match your housing costs, you have to live in areas that require long commutes to work and to home. The housing options, again, adequately sized for First Nations families. There's really a need for larger multi-generational families, as well as smaller units for elders and singles with communal space. And these kind of housing projects should have access to community services and cultural amenities. So they're not just housing, there's a bit of another context that it fits within. Affordable housing is hard to find. Even any rental housing, I can attest to that, is hard to find in this community. And so really it's low-income families, lone-parent families who are really having a struggle to find housing that's in their price range for the size that they need for their family. And then really there is a need for more non-market housing options. And that's really a key around supportive housing, emergency housing options for those with mental health conditions or cognitive or physical disabilities. That's that's evident to most folks who spend time in the community. So you'll see that the engagement yield these broad themes, which I'm sure George will flesh out with more data. But in terms of the findings, we just wanted to cluster those by population, and then I'll turn this over to George. One thing is I would say that youth are at high risk of homelessness. But more to the point that when young people are moving into their first home or leaving, say, the residential care system or the foster care system, that they have a fairly set of unique needs around housing, and that's such things as staff supervision and support. There's a need to take into account the educational needs for those who've left school early, for example. There are also the developmental needs. They may be old enough to go rent an apartment, but developmentally, they still have needs that are unmet. And we have to look closer at that context in which youth are not finding housing, and when they do, an additional level of support for them that's really not common for adult renters, etc. I would say the housing for newcomers into the region, specifically, they have a real need for multi-generational housing. That's the demographics that come to our country, and they bring typically fairly large families with them. And so the kind of housing they need on the incomes they're able to access when they first arrive is really not available to them in the way it should be. And so there is a strong need for that. And there's also a need for them to have a pedestrian access, because typically in arrival, they may not have a car or be licensed to drive in this country, etc. So their needs kind of factor a little bit around their ability to get at things by foot or by public transit. For those with special needs, we've talked a lot with service providers and parents and recipients of service. And one thing they do say is that most of the services are centralized in the urban areas. What they would like to see in the perfect world would be that more distributed model, where people who grow up in a particular part of the community can remain in that area. They have their social supports, their family connections, their social ties, and their ways of being in those communities, and they have to disrupt themselves to move to a different part of the CVRD in order to find housing. So we'd like to see more housing for special needs that's in the neighborhoods in which people grow up and are raised, and they can maintain their natural supports without having to leave those for housing. Finally, we would talk about homelessness and those experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. There is, of course, additional needs for emergency sheltering and long-term options for those experiencing homelessness. And there's certainly a concentration of services supporting that group in Duncan and North Cowichan. And again, when you take people out of their home communities, it becomes harder for them to access the natural supports. And we'd like to see a more distributed model there as well, so people are able to maintain those social ties and those family ties in the communities they were raised in. So that's really just an overview of the key findings by population and a broad overview and of a qualitative perspective of what we encountered when we undertook the process of discussing and dialoguing with the community and then analyzing the findings. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to George to go through more of the quantitative findings. So thank you for your attention today.
Thanks, John. My name is George Parker. I'm from GP Rollo and Associates, and I was hired to work on the quantitative components of this project. As part of the housing needs assessment, we were required to process a great deal of data from the 2006, 2011, and 2016 censuses. The government of BC provided a custom data set specifically for this purpose. The data in this data set might differ from other census data you've seen because it excludes individuals outside of private households. For example, people living in care homes. This government-sanctioned data set is used throughout this research in the interest of consistency. We don't have time to cover all of the background research, so this is a curated selection. This graph shows the rate of population growth in each jurisdiction in the last 5 years in teal and in the last 10 years in green. And that's from the perspective of 2016. So between 2006 and 2016, BC grew in population from 4.1 million to 4.6 million, 12% growth. Whereas the CVRD grew from 75,000 to 82,000, 8% growth. So as you can see, the CVRD grew at about 2/3 the pace of the province. Within the CVRD, jurisdictions that grew particularly rapidly included Ladysmith, and electoral areas A, B, and D, and Duncan and electoral area F both decreased in population by about 7% during this period. Although in both cases, this decline took place entirely in the 2006 to 2011 period, so the first half of that decade. This graph shows the share of households that rent in each jurisdiction over time. From 2006 to 2016, renters as a share of all households in BC increased slightly, from about 30% to about 32%. A smaller share of households in the CVRD are renters, but the same upward trend is present, from about 20% to about 22% over the decade. The CVRD has a renter share of about 22% overall. Ladysmith exhibits about the same share, but North Cowichan and Lake Cowichan have more renters, about 25%. And Duncan has far more renters, about 46%. The electoral areas exhibit a wide range of renter shares and trajectories, but generally have a lower share of renter households than the CVRD as a whole, although during this decade, electoral areas F and I surpassed the region, reaching 23% and 25% respectively. Electoral area G bucked the trend with a continuously decreasing renter share, down from 12% to 10%, making it the jurisdiction with the lowest renter share in 2016. This graph shows median household income in each jurisdiction over time. The CVRD was slightly less affluent than BC throughout this decade. From 2006 to 2016, median household incomes increased in both BC from $62,000 to $70,000 and in the CVRD from $60,000 to $65,000. But the above figures and this graphic are nominal figures that include inflation. If you account for inflation, you get this graphic. You can see here that median household income in BC actually stagnated in real terms, and these are in 2019 dollars, from $76,000 to $75,000, and in the CVRD it declined from $73,000 to $70,000. And the same is true in most jurisdictions. That was median income. If we look at household income distribution, this graph shows household income distribution in BC on the left versus the CVRD on the right, as it changes from 2006 to 2016. This just gives you a sense of what income distribution tends to look like. The main difference here is that the CVRD is slightly less affluent than the province, but also has less income inequality. You can tell because BC has more people in its lowest income and highest income groups. This is a similar comparison between owner households in the CVRD, shown on the left, and renter households in the CVRD, shown on the right. For sake of reference, in 2016, owner households in the region had a median income of $75,000, while renter households had a median income of $38,000. That's literally half the income per household. This would be the kind of distribution that would produce that outcome. This slide explores that very statistic. The solid teal bar shows owner household income. The hatched teal bar shows median renter household income. And the green bar shows their ratio. A higher green bar means owners and renters are more unequal. By this measure, the CVRD exhibits slightly more inequality between tenure groups than BC generally. Within the CVRD, the most equal jurisdictions are electoral areas A, B, and H, and the most unequal jurisdictions are Duncan and electoral areas F, G, and I. This slide compares BC to the CVRD with respect to bedroom counts. In BC, there was about an even split between 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and 4-bedroom units, about 27% each in 2016, with fewer 1-bedroom units, 16%, and even fewer studios, 1%. Whereas in the CVRD, 3-bedroom units dominate at almost 40%, followed by 2- and 4-bedroom units at about 26% each, and very few one-bedroom units, less than 10%. Statistics Canada defines 3 housing standards. They are suitability, meaning that the dwelling is not overcrowded and has an adequate number of bedrooms. In BC, the share of all households falling below the suitability standard decreased from 2006 to 2016, so that's improvement. And compared to BC, households in the CVRD are less crowded, and improvement was also observed. The second housing standard is adequacy, meaning that the dwelling does not need major repairs. The share of all households falling below the adequacy standard in BC and the CVRD remained fairly constant from 2006 to 2016, and BC and the CVRD performed similarly overall. And the third housing standard is affordability, defined as a household spending less than 30% of its income on housing expenses. In BC, the share of all households falling below the affordability standard remained roughly constant from 2006 to 2016. Compared to BC, the CVRD performed slightly more favorably overall. This graph shows renter housing costs in 2016. In 2016, the region had an average monthly rental housing cost of about $940. That number was somewhat higher at about $950 in North Cowichan and Ladysmith, and somewhat lower in Duncan at $830. This graph shows average assessed value per unit over time by property type. As you can see, single family are more valuable per unit, and you have multifamily in that middle group there, 3 different kinds, and manufactured homes pulling up the rear with the lowest property values per unit. Housing prices were stable from 2008 to 2016 because land supply kept up with demand. This was likely due to the global economic recession of 2008, global economic crisis of 2008 and the following recession. Since 2016, prices have increased in all categories, suggesting that demand has increased more than supply. One purpose of a housing needs assessment is to compare housing costs with household incomes. For owner households, housing costs are a function of housing prices, which we had with the property assessment. And for renter household, housing costs are a function, owner households, they're a function of housing prices. Renter households, they're a function of rental rates. Housing prices we can infer from property assessment data, but the most recent government data on household incomes is from 2016, from the census. So we needed another source of more current household income data. We elected to use the socio-demographic estimate produced by Environics Analytics, a research firm specializing in this kind of product. At the time of this analysis, the most recent Environics estimate was from 2019. That's shown here. And as you can see, it's a very similar income distribution to what the census showed. This graph shows the distribution of housing values per unit in the CVRD in 2019. We also have this data by housing type and by jurisdiction, but this just shows you all of it in a single distribution. We combine these 2 sources of data, that is this slide and the previous one, to produce an estimate of housing affordability for owner households in each jurisdiction. On this graphic, each line represents a jurisdiction. The horizontal variable is household income, and the vertical variable is housing expenses. As income increases, so do housing costs, but typically not as quickly. Income groups falling above the black line spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and income groups falling above the red line spend more than 50% of their income on housing. This graphic gives us a table. The middle column shows the income below which an owner household with a mortgage would be likely to have trouble falling above the black line, that is, avoiding housing need in each jurisdiction. The right column shows the share of owner households in this group. By this account, The most affordable jurisdictions in which to own property are Electoral Area B and Lake Cowichan, probably due to these communities having more manufactured homes. And the least affordable jurisdiction is Electoral Area I. These results indicate that the share of owner households that fall below the 30% affordability threshold ranges from 10% to 36%, depending on jurisdiction, and has an overall average of 17%, which is mostly in line with historical trends reported in the census. Using different data sources, we can do a similar exercise for renters. So this graph is similar to the last graph, but for renters rather than owners. Each line represents a jurisdiction. You'll notice there's fewer lines because we didn't have as much data, so we've grouped together certain jurisdictions. And once again, as income increases, so do housing costs, but typically not as quickly. Income groups falling above the black line spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and falling above the red line spend more than 50% on housing. This table for each jurisdiction in the CVRD shows the share of renters spending more than 30% of their income on housing and the share spending more than 50%. About 40% of the region's renters are in core housing need, and about 14% are in extreme housing need. And finally, this table shows the overall totals, which include owner and renter households. About 22% of all households in the region are in core housing need, and about 4% are in extreme core housing need. Moving on to projections. We were asked in this process to use the population and housing projections produced by Rennie Intelligence in 2019. However, Rennie produced 4 projections, which differ chiefly in terms of how closely the urban containment boundary is respected, starting in 2017. For our 2019 estimate, we therefore elected to, these scenarios diverge starting in 2017. Therefore, Rennie not only provides 4 versions of the future, but 4 versions of the present. For our 2019 estimate, we therefore elected to stick with Environics, with the exception of Lake Cowichan, where Rennie's scenario 3 is used in both 2019 and 2025, which we'll get to later, as this more closely matches the growth trajectory that Lake Cowichan staff anticipate. Of the 4 Rennie scenarios available to us, which is the most appropriate? Well, the 4 scenarios differ only with respect to how closely the urban containment boundary is observed. They therefore differ with respect to housing supply factors, that is, development approval, rather than housing demand factors. With a given level of demand, which our research indicates is very high in the Cowichan Valley, the more land supply is available for development, the more affordable housing will tend to become in the region. Therefore, in the interest of maximizing affordability, we elected to use whichever Rennie scenario anticipates the most growth in each jurisdiction, as this would tend to produce the most affordable housing outcomes. There are 2 exceptions to this, Lake Cowichan and Electoral Area I. In both cases, a lower growth scenario, scenario 3, is applied as the more extreme scenarios were deemed implausible. This methodology produced the projection seen here. We project that the region will grow in household count from about 35,000 in 2019 to about 40,000 in 2025, which would be growth of about 14% in 6 years. This would be somewhat more rapid growth than observed in the past. The number of households in the region grew by 13% in the decade between 2006 and 2016. Under this scenario, the slowest growing jurisdiction in terms of household count will be Lake Cowichan at 3%, and the fastest growing will be Electoral Area F at 54%. And here's the population projection, which is very similar. Statistics Canada defines housing suitability as follows. No less than 1 bedroom per household member, except for couples, and except for children depending on their age and sex. It may not be evident, but this definition is extremely austere. Merely meeting this requirement throughout a community would produce extremely cramped housing. Both Environics and Rennie provide estimates of population per household, but we lack the information on age and sex distribution within households. Therefore, to generate an estimate of housing need by bedroom count, we simplified the Statistics Canada standard to the following: no less than 1 bedroom per household member, but couples may share a room. This is both practical and produces more generous housing needs estimates. The stipulation that couples may share bedrooms is very important because a huge number of households contain couples. In the CVRD in 2016, according to the census, 89% of 2-bedroom households consisted of a couple, 73% of 3-bedroom households contained a couple, 84% of 4-person households contained a couple, and so on. So defining housing need in this way, which is only slightly more generous than Statistics Canada, produces the counterintuitive outcome shown here. The majority of housing need, shown in green, is for 1-bedroom units, because most households consist of 1 person or a couple. But the majority of housing in the region, shown in teal, has 3 or more bedrooms. In other words, most households in the CVRD have more bedrooms than they need. In fact, existing supply in 2016 already exceeded housing need in 2025 for units with 2 or more bedrooms. However, it would be an error to interpret this as suggesting that only 1-bedroom units should be constructed from now on. That's because this represents the minimum number of bedrooms, not the ideal number of bedrooms. Need is different than preference, different than demand, different than market desire. In other words, because most households in the CVRD have more than enough housing, housing need by bedroom count is not a very useful or informative statistic. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing here. Maybe, not sure how to mute? I guess I'll just carry on. Because most households in the CVRD have more than enough bedrooms, housing need by bedroom count is not a very useful or informative statistic for planning. Although it is still worth noting that the region could use more 1-bedroom units, because this was always also a finding of the community engagement research as presented by Mr. Horn. One other thing, GPRA has modified the household income projection provided by Environics to produce 2 income projections for each jurisdiction in the CVRD. A rapid recovery scenario, which has the household incomes in the region recovering rapidly from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is based directly on Environics, and a slow recovery scenario. This projection assumes a slower economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, which reduces household incomes overall. The reality is likely to fall somewhere between these 2 scenarios. So on this graphic, teal is the present distribution of income, light green is the slow recovery scenario, and dark green is the rapid recovery scenario. At present, household incomes are about $75,000 per household, and we have those rising to $89,000 in the rapid recovery scenario or $84,000 in the slow recovery scenario. But again, these are nominal income figures. If you remove inflation from the question and you use constant 2016 dollars, in 2019, incomes are about $70,000 per household, and that will rise to about $75,000 in the rapid recovery scenario, or stay roughly where it is at $70,000 in the slow recovery scenario. We use this income projection to produce a projection of tenure, so renters or owners in the region and in each jurisdiction. And just as you'd expect, in the rapid recovery scenario, we have the tenure mix shifting somewhat towards owner households, whereas in the slow recovery scenario, it stays basically where it is now. I'm not seeing any text here, but this slide is asking for discussion and questions. Oh, there it is. Discussion and questions.
Thank you very much.
I'll open the floor.
if we can get folks who aren't speaking to turn off their microphones, please. Mr. Horn, yours has given us a lot of feedback, it looks like. Thank you. So if we can lower the presentation so that we can see the directors, we can open the
Sure.
discussion. Thank you. All right, so I'll go, I'll take my speakers list. I have Director, keep your hand up till you hear your name called, Director Sebring. Oh, sorry, Duncan, who else? Smith, McGonigal. I can't see when hands go over faces. Oh, Director Morrison. And Marsh, and then I'll come back when we've got some of those out of the way. I've got Nicholson. Okay, go ahead, Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Parker and Mr. Horn. A long-awaited and excellent presentation. Ton of good information here. I've already reviewed the North Cowichan piece as well, and some interesting things there too. Mr. Parker, you said something that intrigued me, and I'd like you to expand on it with respect to how stringently we live within our policy objectives as expressed in urban containment boundaries, and the impact that those decisions have on affordability. Did I hear you say that if we build more and create less restrictive urban containment boundaries and make more land available for development, that it has a positive impact on affordability?
That is generally true, yes. I would say, though, as a planner, which I am, there are plenty of other very good reasons, from environmental to transportation-based to creating vibrant urban centers and so on, why that might not be a good idea. But strictly speaking, if you increase the availability of housing, here's a thought experiment. In a market context, if you build 50 homes in a location, they'll tend to go to the 50 highest bidders. Whereas if you build 100 homes in the same location, they will tend to go to the 100 highest bidders. And that's just how markets work. Therefore, as you increase supply, the average price tends to go down simply as a function of mathematics. Now, it can't go down past a certain point, which is the cost to build. You can't sell a new unit for less than it costs to build it. But generally, the more supply, the lower the prices.
You know, this is the dilemma. We were talking about it last night in a committee of the whole meeting at North Cowichan. We're in the middle of rewriting our OCP, and one of the pieces there is the growth management strategy. And I mean, I get both sides of the equation. We want to promote compact communities in the sense that, you know, not only is it good for the environment and all those other things, it's also good for us municipally, because it costs a hell of a lot less to service those 50 homes if they're clustered than if we have to run water and sewer lines hither and yon and all over the place because we're not clustering. So there's good reasons to do the compact development. But, you know, equally, I can take you to places in North Cowichan, and we're fairly strict about our UCB, where properties that are relatively compatible and you know, each by like, there's major price differences because one is inside the UCB and can be developed, and the other one's sitting out there and you can't do anything with it. So do you have any advice in terms of finding that balance? I know it's a political question, but damn it.
It's a political question. I don't feel that when I'm speaking to a group of people who are really the decision makers, you know, and all I know is that there does tend to be that trade-off, and that there are perhaps side strategies, right? Strategies that allow you to have your cake and eat it. For example, making it easier to live in multifamily homes will tend to increase the desirability of multifamily homes. Now, multifamily homes this would tend to increase the price of your multifamily homes. but it would tend, because multifamily homes are, by that I mean townhomes, apartments, because those units are cheaper on average than single family homes, if you have more of them, your average housing price will go down. So planning strategies to make multifamily living more attractive can include things like having a good public transportation system, having complete neighborhoods where you can live in an apartment, and the appeal of that is you can walk to the grocery store, your kids can walk to school, so that you can live that more urban format of living. But I will say, it is absolutely an intractable planning problem, and there's just simply a trade-off at some point. However, there are policies that can be introduced and have to some extent been introduced, and I'm sure John could speak to these more than me, for making sure that those at the bottom end of the housing spectrum have what they need to avoid the direst consequences of unaffordability. This effect that we're discussing about supply constraints leading to more expensive housing is really on the market side of things. You know, it's not that bottom 10% of the population, bottom only in the sense of bottom of the income distribution, let's say. It's more the people who can afford to purchase homes in the first place. As for the renter side, dedicating zoning to, the municipalities are now empowered by the province to make a rental zoning. And that's something that can help increase the supply of rental, which is a particularly important tenure, of course, for lower income households. So that's a variety of ways of thinking about this, but I don't deny that there's a trade-off. And it's not really my place to say what communities should do to strike that balance, because the ideal balance varies by geography, varies by community.
Sure, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I am mindful that we have a long speakers list. So if we can keep our questions and our responses as concise as possible. And to our municipal partners, I understand that this will be presented to the municipal councils as well. So maybe for us municipal directors, we can save most of our specific questions around our municipalities for that. Next, I have Directors Duncan, then Smith, then McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on the household incomes. How is that based? I know it must be from Stats Canada. Is it based on one person working on the household, two people? Is it just by address? Did it come from Stats Canada? So just some background on how they come up with that household income level.
Sure. There's different data sources and there's different data components here. So I'll just go through them briefly. The first part of the presentation covered census data. So that was from the 2006, 2011, and 2016 censuses. And they define households as any two people, well, any one person really, people living together. It's private households. It's just about everybody. Exceptions to private households would be people living in care homes, other kinds of institutional arrangements, that kind of thing. So it's their income, their annual income. You add together all the incomes in the household and that's it. Presumably, Stats Canada gets that information directly from people. I believe it's short form census or long form census, which means they poll 25% of the population, and then they apply some basic data analysis tools to generalize that to the other 75% of the population. Then there was our 2019 and 2025 income projections. And those are produced by a company called Environics Analytics with a little bit of processing from yours truly. They have proprietary methodology, but essentially I believe they use census data, they use things like surveys, they use economic modeling and so on to make an estimate of income distribution. And as I showed there, it's fairly compatible and tells a very similar story to the census data.
Thank you.
And that's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Director Duncan. I have Director Smith, then McGonigal, then Morrison. Go ahead, Director Smith.
Thank you. That was an extremely fascinating presentation. It's always nice to have those presentations with the commentary going with it because it gives us an opportunity to actually hear a little more detail. I noticed that there was an indication that Area G is going to population is going to grow, and yet the last presentation that we saw, there was some of our communities that were going in the other direction. So I'll split it down the middle and say we're going to grow a little. And that one of the things that I'm out in the communities a lot and I listen to what people are up to. And a lot of people are buying a second home, and those homes are for their personal use. So we have people that are from, say, the Lower Mainland or from elsewhere. They come to our areas and they own a second home. That home isn't available for rental. And I don't know if you have any details on how many of those are actually sitting there. Or we have situations where they own a little RV lot situation. So those aren't available for rental. They're not part of the rental pool. So there's some gaps in some of the material that we just don't have any stats on as to what's going on there. And I think that, a lot of people in their areas have illegal rentals going on. So the rental situation is not necessarily, people aren't going to fill in a form. Yes, I have an illegal rental on my property. And then we have the other situation where we have the Airbnbs that are removing rental possibilities out of our pool. So we have a lot of areas that we don't have those stats, and as much as we do have those rentals actually in our areas, they're just not part of these stats sometimes. But I really appreciated the presentation, and I'm going to definitely rewatch the video. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. And we'll go on to Director McGonigal, then Morrison, then Marsh. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Horn and Mr. Parker, thank you very much for that very informative report and presentation. I think if nothing else, it shows the diversity of the Cowichan Valley Regional District in not only affordability, but in availability, as was stated. When you look to the south as opposed to the east and the west, there are so many discrepancies within those areas and needs within those areas. I was pleased that a planner had mentioned a topic that I have brought up many times within the municipality's forte of rental zoning within our municipalities to accommodate the affordability within that. And I would encourage everyone within the municipal forte to investigate that to the fullest capacity, whether it's percentages within that zoning or whatever. Consider that as an option for affordability. When you look at some of those numbers and the projections that are needed, I think that's imperative.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Any comment on that, Mr. Parker?
No, I suppose as a planner, it's exciting to me to hear whenever municipalities are empowered by the Municipal Government Act to introduce new kinds of zoning, especially when it has the power to really ensure that a kind of housing that is in dire need might be more present and available. So I echo the director's comments.
Thank you. I have Director Morrison, then Marsh, then Nicholson. Go ahead, Director Morrison.
Thank you, and I'll try and be brief. I have to say I kind of love the optimism in your housing projections and population growth for electoral area F. Gosh, if we could reach them, that'd be great. My questions are around, so you made some mention of manufactured homes, and technically we really don't have any in my electoral area, which it kind of leads me to a question around, and this is both around the rental and owning, is the push to broaden use of non-traditional housing types to accommodate some of the pressures that we're facing. And I've got a lot of pressure to look at the tiny home question. I've got a lot of pressure to look at, we're starting to get more pressure on a desire for people to be able to have a pad beside their house and rent it out as an RV space. And then it's already been mentioned, the issue around Airbnb taking, rental housing out of that pool. So it's around that, I wouldn't call it necessarily lower end, but that alternative housing. Do you have any predictions as to how that's going to impact, some of the more rural areas? And I just want to make this one point. 3 or 4 years ago, all of our planners were saying that there wasn't really a need for additional residential housing lots to be created in my electoral area. And now you can't find one for sale. But your projections take into account the fact that we've actually gone ahead and created more potential building lots in our area so that we now have that room for the growth. But my specific point is around those alternative housing types, RVs as a type of housing, which, a lot of areas are trying to discourage. Any thoughts in that area?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that don't thank me for the projection. We were instructed by the CVRD staff to make use of Rennie's projections, which were produced in early 2019. We did make use of those projections, and let me tell you, regarding electoral area F in particular, no, is this the one I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of a different electoral area. Anyway, Rennie seems to present the case that assuming that the urban containment boundary is not respected, I'm not commenting on the wisdom of that, but Rennie seems to take the perspective that assuming that's the case, this kind of really quite rapid growth in electoral area F and other electoral areas to a lesser extent is possible. He did a land analysis. He looked at the land that was available, and he simply made that projection. All the indicators of the market that I've ran into during this process have suggested that the demand is tremendous, it's growing, and it will only continue to grow for the next few years at least. Now, touching on the comment regarding manufactured homes, coach homes, basement suites, I will say any increase in the diversity of housing will tend to have positive effects for affordability. Take from that what you will. But as you increase the variety of options available, more households that may not have been served by the previous more constrained market will find that they can afford a place to live now. Manufactured homes, I recognize, aren't everyone's favorite. They're not exactly popular from neighbors. And also manufactured homes tend to not be what in economics terms we call the highest and best use of land. And by that I mean, if you could build anything, manufactured homes would probably not be the most lucrative thing to create on a lot. But that doesn't mean they're the worst for affordability. So I think it's certainly worth thinking about.
So just a follow-up, quick clarification on the concept of tiny homes. You say you're a planner, and we're getting a lot of buzz on tiny homes, and they obviously have to fit into a zone of some sort. But your anticipation of where that's going to fit in, not just my area, but there's a demand for it within urban areas as well. Yeah, I'm talking about those tiny ones on trailers that can be picked up and moved if need be.
There's a market. The depth of that market isn't something that I've investigated specifically, but I would say that just like there's this word for these little homes that you put on the side of a house, maybe in the facing onto the back alley. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Carriage houses.
Coach houses, yeah.
Or laneway.
Exactly, laneway, that's it. So just like laneway homes, what these do is they essentially are a sneaky way to increase density. So they create 2 units out of 1, and they provide a source of income for the owner household. So what that means is it's a win-win from an affordability perspective. And I imagine that tiny homes would have the same dynamic in that they would create something from nothing. They would allow you to put a home where previously a home didn't exist. But it's not really something for nothing because there are knock-on effects when you increase density. increased traffic, increased municipal costs of a variety of kinds, increased need for amenities in the neighborhood, and so on. And managing that through a variety of mechanisms is really the art of municipal governance, right? So you have that trade-off between growth, which is good for affordability, but bad for municipal costs. And I don't know what the right approach is, but I will say that tiny homes and other things of a similar nature will be good for affordability.
Thank you very much. I have Director Marsh, then Nicholson, then Kuhn. The full list, I have myself, Director Martman, and back to Director Smith. So that's my full list right now. But next I have Director Marsh, Nicholson, then Kuhn.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm going to be able to word this in a way that you understand what I'm getting at. I'm looking at your chart, income distribution, and I'm not a planner and I'm not an expert in housing, but I see that in the Cowichan Valley, there's a large number of people. I'm not saying they're the largest number, but if you, I don't know how to say this, that are whose income is between $20,000 and $119,000. And that I just got that from sticking my pencil across your graph. And so if the average price of the single family home, which it seems like most districts are more inclined to build, is $500,000, how do you relate that to be affordable even to someone whose household income is $119,000?
Well, I actually have some statistics here, so I'm going to pull those up.
Great.
You can't see them. You can't see them, but I can.
Okay.
So
can you send them to us at some point?
You have them. I have submitted them to a folder. Modus and Corley Breen of the CVRD staff have
Great.
access to this, and I can direct you to that. It's essentially what I'm looking at here is summaries that I've made of assessment data. So what we see here is that the average assessed value of a single family home in the whole CVRD is, like you said, just north of $500,000. So about 546,000. And that varies by jurisdiction, some places higher, some places lower. So I don't know off the top of my head the income that would make that affordable, but there is definitely an income group below that level. It's absolutely true, and it will always be true, because the cost of building a single family home is in the hundreds of thousands. The cost to build one, even for a developer just to build it. And so it is impossible to generate new housing below that price. Now, of course, there's always the existing supply of housing, and there's no rule that can't be lower. And indeed, in some jurisdictions, the average price of housing is well below the cost to build a new house. And yet, you would never expect the market to satisfy all housing needs. It simply can't be done because there are costs to construction. Rental housing helps in that it allows people to get housed without a down payment. Multifamily housing helps in that it's cheaper to build a smaller unit, and it's easier to make money if you build more of them. And yet, at the end of the day, it was impossible for the market to satisfy all of the housing needs of any community. And that's why policies and strategies are needed to provide non-market housing and subsidies of various kinds that meet people's personal needs, whether those are low income, seniors, people with disabilities, and so on. I'm not sure exactly how to better answer your question than that.
No, I appreciate that. May I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair? Yes. Okay, so it sounded like you were saying that your research showed that if we made our urban containment boundaries larger, it would make housing more affordable to more people. And I wondered if in that, is that correct, what you said?
That will tend to be the case.
Okay,
Yes.
so did you factor in the cost of traveling, having to own a vehicle, the cost of not just putting in the pipes initially, but the asset management of all the things that would be required in order to do that? Is that factored in?
Factored in what sense?
Well, okay, so it's cheaper. A house is cheaper to buy, but when you think of the taxpayers that are helping to allow that house to be cheaper for that purchaser, is it indeed a wise move for us, a muni or an area direct or electoral area, to build out? Because in the long term, it's everybody else that's going to be paying for the replacement and the maintenance of the infrastructure and the assets. So to me, I don't want to challenge you because you're a lot more intelligent than I am about this, but I'm feeling a bit like hearing that is kind of a false economy.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
I actually think that the ideal situation is for development to be forced to pay for itself. So
I agree.
measures such as DCCs, CACs, land, phase development agreements, measures put in place to ensure that new development pays for as many of the costs it generates as possible. But I also want to loop back to what you said and say you disagree. Well, I don't actually think it's necessarily the right approach to expand the urban containment boundary.
That's what I wanted to.
It's just that it's a political choice. There are
Right.
trade-offs to be made between using the market mechanisms to increase affordability on the one hand, and on the other hand, pursuing all these perfectly valid planning objectives, such as reduce pollution, complete communities, and so on. I don't have a particular stake in which choice the municipalities and the district go with that, right?
Right.
But since it's an affordability study, since it's a housing needs assessment study, that mechanic was our focus.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to lead the floor knowing that you're going to come to North Cowichan, but I'm glad to hear that you don't think that making urban containment boundaries for many reasons larger is necessarily wise. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, then Kuhn, then myself, then Martman, and then Smith. And I'm noticing we are an hour into our meeting. So once that's done, we do have this item coming up under our reports as well. So we will have more opportunity for discussion then. Go ahead, Director Nicholson, then Kuhn, then myself.
Thank you, Chair. This is so interesting and a great presentation. So I am wondering about, we have this needs assessment study done, and we're going to take this information and use it in our planning. But I also know in my area, which is Area E, the sort of the electoral area that cups Duncan, the urban area, I know that there are a lot of not legal people living out in the bush behind the trees that we don't see. And I'm wondering how much confidence can we put on this study for our planning?
Well, in the sense that the reliability of the projections?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, it really depends on whether you, the extent to which you trust the Bob Rennie projection methodology that we were instructed to use. Basically, what Rennie did was he basically projected regional growth as an extension of historical trends, and then how that growth is distributed varies by scenario. And we cherry pick from among those scenarios to show the maximum scenario in each jurisdiction. So essentially what we're saying is, as aggressive as Winnie is willing to go, that is what we will model. In terms of reliability, I believe it's mostly based on census data. So in terms of the actual counts, the actual numbers. So only as reliable as the census. It's not 100%. And I assume they miss some people. But I also assume Statistics Canada has a variety of mechanisms for making sure that everyone is captured. So I'm not exactly sure how to go further with my answer.
Okay.
If I could add to that, maybe the unhoused population usually doesn't get captured by the formal census methodologies. And you know that we do our own homeless counts typically in communities to assess, but more on an ongoing basis. We would look at shelter take-up and connections with outreach workers and VHA, mental health and substance use. So the caseloads of the social agencies that respond to the needs of those without any place to live at all is probably the most accurate way on a day-to-day basis to track what is the population that's unhoused in your community. And sort of as we move forward, it's likely that those are the kind of data sets we'll be drawing up, and we won't rely much on bigger formal data sets like Census Canada because they don't capture that unhoused population very much at all. So we'd rely on the connections with our local social agencies to determine ongoing, how many people are there that really are unhoused, absolutely unhoused, and need some form of redress in that regard. So that's probably how we continue on that one.
Yeah, can I just follow up? I guess I think that we ought to be focusing as well on all the people that are living in RVs and little tiny cabins in the woods that have, not proper whatever. I know that there's a lot of them, and now we're getting fancier tiny homes on mobile tiny homes, but there are a lot of people that live that way. And I think that we shouldn't overlook that in our planning, that's all.
So was that a rhetorical question? Is this a statement?
I don't make rhetorical statements.
No, that was a position, not a query, I thought. But
it was a position. I just don't want to. I just think when we're using this kind of study for planning, we can't forget the data that we don't have. That's.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. And John, I think you've addressed that about talking about the qualitative piece and bringing in those other metrics and analysis that Cowichan Housing's done as well, right? So, but again, we do the heavy lifting at local government when we amend our policies to support the types of housing that are needed, right? So, any other comments before I move on my speakers list? Sorry, I'm not sure what the background noise is, but again, if I could remind the directors, if you're not speaking, to please mute your microphones. Director Kuhn, I believe you're next. You're fine? Okay. Just a quick comment from myself in the speakers list here. I just want to say that I love the data and the statistical interpretations. I know that there's a lot of specific questions that I may have, but I'll save those for my council. Just those little parts that seem to stick out as like almost like a blip in the radar, like the statistics sort of seem to carry a methodology throughout, but then there's something that sticks out maybe as a bit of a sore thumb. So I really just want to say I appreciate the data and the interpretations, because it does, I think, confirm and line up with some of the anecdotal observations and stories we hear. I know, John, in your work, you probably see quite a bit of that. So I'm thank you for all of the work. And I know that many of us are embarking on OCP and zoning bylaw discussions, and this kind of information is so informative and helpful in us being able to use facts to help support some of the more controversial housing or OCP type decisions we may make in terms of increasing density and affordability, and some of those things that in typically suburban rural communities can sometimes create a public fervor around those desires to support those types of housing. So moving on to Director Martman, and then I'll go back to Director Smith. If I've missed anyone, just feel free to put your hands up.
Hi, I'm Director Martman from Area H, and thank you very much for the report. I echo many others in that I really appreciate having something like this to share with my constituents. I always look at these from a data research perspective, and I'd like to know, I have a couple of comments, but where do you think are the most vulnerable assumptions that you're making in presenting this data?
Very good question. Well, we were instructed to use Rennie's projections, and they rely upon two basic streams of data. One is the overall amount of growth in the region, and that's based on historical trends. And the other is the scenarios themselves, which divvy that growth up between jurisdictions in the region. I believe his methodology was principally based on basically the amount of undeveloped land. And it may be that there are many places in the region where that approach was simply incorrect because, well, it's, for example, if you look at electoral area I or electoral area F or Lake Cowichan, there are places where Rennie projected, at least in some scenarios or even most scenarios, a huge amount of growth, completely out of line with historical trends, which are constrained by policy forces. And it seems, in my opinion, it seems to me like a lot of those might be implausible. So that's certainly a methodological weakness. In terms of another methodological weakness is that because we were doing this project in 2019 and 2020, but the most recent official data from the government was from 2016. When we make the jump from 2016 to 2019, we need to start switching our data sources. Whenever you switch your data sources, you introduce sources of error and sources of conflict in the data, where, for example, you show trends that might not actually exist. They just different data projections and different sources of data count things in slightly different ways. And one particular area is that we have a estimate of household size, so number of people per household in 2019, which comes from Environics, and in 2025, which comes from Rennie. And these often show very different average number of people per unit. And there's two interpretations there. One interpretation is that that's real, and we're projecting a change of household size. The other interpretation is, well, they use different methodologies and they come up with different answers. And consequently, that change in household size may be somewhat spurious. And so that's another methodological weakness. And here's another methodological weakness. We don't have data connecting the incomes of particular households with the price of a particular home. So we know the distribution of income, and we know the distribution of housing prices, but we don't know how they match up. So our methodology required us to make a best guess. And what we basically did was we basically applied the top 1% of the population will live in the top 1% of expensive housing, the top 10% in the top 10%, and so on. Now that should approximate something accurate, but there's no way to be entirely sure until the next census, which would be in 2021. And so that's just a source of methodological weakness. But since the most recent data we had was 2016, there wasn't really much we could do about it. I could probably keep going about methodological weaknesses, but I'll stop it. I'll stop it there because, in the interest of time.
Okay, and just a follow-up to that then, because to me that whenever I look at a report, I love to see that in part of the report somewhere, because to me that has intrinsic value to know where potential weaknesses are, and I don't necessarily see it in here, or was it meant to be included? That's just a follow-up to that. But a question, and then sort of another assumption that I saw on this was around the 30% and 50% rules. And I'm wondering how applicable they are if you don't take into account household debt. And so do you look at household debt at any point in this?
Yes, we do look at household debt. In fact, we ran that same analysis that you saw on households, owner households, with with mortgages and without mortgages, and which is the biggest source of household debt. And what we found is that that graphic we showed you was for people with mortgages, households with mortgages. For households without mortgages, it is much more favorable. Housing is much more affordable in the sense that their monthly household costs without a mortgage expense are easily, in all cases for owner households, easily below that 30% mark. And if somebody actually, one of the comments we got on one of these reports was somebody had crunched the numbers and said, this doesn't seem to look right. If let's say the cutoff is 55,000, anyone below this would be expected to be in housing need. And they said, well, but that's not, and you've said that's 20% of the population, but it's actually much more. Well, the reason for that disconnect is because we've taken the households without mortgages out of that factor. We've said this really only applies to owner households with mortgages. So yeah, we have incorporated debt to some extent into the analysis.
And lastly, if I may, do you take into account the generational wealth transfer?
Not directly.
Okay.
However, one of the things we do look at is how the value of homes has escalated over the years, so that people who live in existing homes, they're actually paying a mortgage based on, let's say, 10 years ago. Whereas there's a section of the report that looks at the affordability of new housing. So if you were to buy a home that was just built, and that of course looks at housing costs today, the cost to construct a home today. And so those produce very different results, in part because there's these factors. And of course that would impact there would be intergenerational aspects there, but that's very indirect.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think I have Director Smith to close, and then we'll probably just take a quick break before we resume our agenda. We're almost just about an hour and a half in. Go ahead, Director Smith.
Thank you. Once again, I love the report, and I'm going to definitely have to look a lot more. One of the things that I think is electoral areas are very different than municipalities. And right now we're currently working at doing a harmonized official community plan. Some of the things that we have to take into consideration are the water sustainability, as we have areas that definitely have water issues. And we also have to look at the wastewater without specific infrastructure in place. Then we're looking at a really different area, and most of our electoral areas are a mixture of all those combinations of water sustainability, wastewater systems, septic systems on soil types that don't work. So all of those things have to go into our OCP. One of the other things is electoral areas are not able to collect the DCC that municipalities are able to use. And that sort of puts us in a different category for some of the things that would be attainable if we were a municipality. Also, none of the figures really reflect that a lot of those people in the income bracket for 2020 went from one family member with two people with a paycheck to one person with a paycheck. So it's really hard to look at these numbers and see what the 2020 actually is. We won't know that for maybe a year of the household income has drastically changed for many people in 2020. And I think that one of the other things that we're looking at is the step code coming in that's going to increase the cost of housing. So we have so many things on our plate that we have to consider along with your report. That's definitely a benefit for us to have this report at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we're at the end of our speakers list. I just want to say thank you so much for all of your work and great information. Get the virtual clap Sorry if you can't hear the roar of the applause, but you can see it on your screen. And Mr. Horn and Mr. Parker, thank you for all your work and support. As most of the directors have indicated, I think we're almost all redoing our OCPs. So this is really important information to utilize as we go on those processes. So I will say thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again. And Ms. Legault, is there anything we need to cover before we take a brief break? Okay, thank you very much. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes, be back at 3 p.m. Thank you both very much. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you both.
Everyone.
Camera's live.
Great, thank you. So we are back, and I would say that we will, our delegates have remained behind, and I don't want to make them wait till we get through all our committee reports and correspondence to let them move on with their day. So we'll move SR1 up to the next item on the agenda quickly. Ms. Legault, should I get a motion for that, or is that within my prerogative?
It's within the chair's purview.
Thank you. So we'll move on to SR1, just under number 11, staff reports. And Ms. Legault, if you want to read out the recommendation while everyone scrolls down the agenda to that location, we'll go ahead.
Sure, Mr. Chair. This is a staff report from Community Planning, and the proposed recommendation is that the Cowichan Valley Regional District Housing Needs Assessment Reports 2021 be received.
Thank you. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those... Sorry, we do have discussion on a motion to receive. Director Sebring, then Marsh.
Just a question. What happens to this report now? I mean, we've put a lot of energy and time into this and a lot of money. The province had insisted that all regions and municipalities do this. Now what? Just a very practical thing going forward.
I know it'll be incorporated into our municipal and regional OCP work, but I would turn it over to staff for more clarity on next steps. And just a reminder again to directors, please mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and through the chair. We have a requirement, first of all, with the province after EASC and each municipal council receives the report to then file all of the reports with the province. The municipal planning managers and directors have it. Each respective local government will then consider it in conjunction with updating their OCP.
Thank you. Director Sebring, follow up.
I just want to make sure it doesn't sit on a shelf and collect dust. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're eagerly anticipating this data to inform our OCP process. So I will go through to Director Marsh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge that Mr. Parker said that there were some spurious data in here. And he did mention Rini and company, and I can tell you that North Cowichan got a report on housing and employment and affordability predictions last night. So I'm sure that it was in a public meeting. I'm sure that if North CVRD staff don't have it yet, they could certainly get it sent by North Cowichan. It was as a part of a MODIS report, and there was a link in this report. And because the feeling I got from this was like, this isn't like the Bible. This is like they were given a certain parameter, and that's the answer to that parameter. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you again. I know our delegates are probably in the background because I don't see them on camera, but thank you both again, and I'm sure we'll have further discussions in the future.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Ms. Legault, back to our regularly scheduled agenda. I think we're on correspondence.
So if there's no report from the chair, then yes, we're on to correspondence. Item C1, Brian Thacker, Pacific Industrial and Marine, with a request for a letter of support for BC Coast Clean Waters Funding Project. And should the board be willing to provide that letter of support, the proposed recommendation is that a letter of support be provided to Pacific Industrial and Marine for their application to the BC Coast Clean Waters Initiative.
Thank you. I believe that's moved by Director Yanni DiNardo. Is that a second by Director Wilson?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I'd also like to speak on it if possible.
Yeah, I'll always go to the mover first. If you'd like to speak to it, Director Yanni DiNardo and then Director Wilson.
Yeah, this is just something that this organization has been doing for a long time on their own dime a lot of the time. So this is something that's really needed in on our waters. So it's simple as that.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Exactly as Director Yanni DiNardo said, it is a no-brainer. So I said, let's just give them the support they need.
Absolutely. And I know that many of the local industries have taken it on themselves to be that sort of helper in our areas. Saltair Marine here does much the same. So I know we're all grateful for that. So it has been moved and seconded. Seeing no more discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Legault.
On to committee and commission reports. Item CR1 is the report and recommendations of the Kerry Park Recreation Commission meeting of November 24th, 2020.
Over to you, Director Wilson, for those recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have great pleasure in saying great stuff, good stuff. Let's go forward with these. And do I have to move the motion? It's just a recommendation. As far as I can see, I move those recommendations.
Thank you. Typically, the chair that's presenting them will read the recommendations and say, and I move those items, but we can all see them in front of us if the board's okay with that. I believe it's been seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. And discussion, Director Acton.
It's just a quick comment. I just wanted to point out that the Kerry Park budget is on here, and I spoke to the manager where we had been some question. It was a little bit unclear, I think, at our budget meeting, but we will be going above our zero mandate in order to take out a loan for the pickleball courts. I am in favor of the pickleball courts, but just as a note, we are not sticking with the zero budget, and we will have to borrow that money and come out of requisition as well for the first year's payment.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further discussion? Director Marsh.
Yeah, it was a long day yesterday, but I thought that on this item that Director Atkins mentioned, that the board approval was conditional on the receipt of a grant. Did I get that wrong?
Director Acton.
I can answer, I guess, for staff, really. It will come back to the commission to see if we will go forward with the pickleball courts if we don't get the grant, but the loan is in process, and the loan will or the requisition will increase to cover the first year of the loan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Moving on to CR2, Ms. Legault.
The report and recommendation of the Cowichan Lake Recreation Commission meeting of November 26th.
Director Kuhn, do you want to read that one out? I see it there. He's moving that the draft 2021 draft budget for Function 405 Cowichan Lake Recreation be approved. Seconded by Director Morrison. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on to CR3, Ms. Legault.
The report and recommendations of the Special Corporate Services Committee meeting of January 13th.
I'll cover those because Director McGonigal's, I don't believe he's back yet. He's just going to be a few minutes before he rejoins us. The recommendations are that 1, the supplemental request for Function 238 Community Parks Area H Fern Gully Trail Bridge, the Hiking and Equestrian Bridge West Trail be referred to the January 25th Special Corporate Services meeting. which just happened the other day. Number 2, the 2021 draft budget as amended for Function 106 commuter transit be approved. Number 3, that 2021 draft budget as amended for Function 107 conventional and custom transit services be approved. Number 4, 1, that the supplemental request for Function 100 general government regional recreation referendum and analysis be approved. 4.2, that the supplemental request for Function 121 economic development regional connectivity strategy be approved. Number 3, that the supplemental request for Function 280 regional parks Cowichan Valley trail replacement of major culverts be approved. Number 4, that the supplemental request for Function 280 regional parks regional parks regional active transportation plan be approved. Number 5, that supplemental request for Function 280 regional parks vehicle replacement be approved. Number 6, that the supplemental request for Function 285 regional parkland acquisition master plan be approved. Number 7, that supplemental request for Function 520 solid waste management complex transfer station scale replacement be approved. Number 8, that the supplemental request for Function 520 solid state management complex Peerless Road skid steer replacement be approved. Number 5, that the draft 2021 budget for Function 235 Area E Community Parks be amended by, number 1, increasing minor capital by $10,000. Number 2, increasing invasive species management by $5,000. Number 3, increasing requisition by $15,000. Number 6, that the draft 2021 budget for Function 237 Area G Community Parks be amended by 1, increasing minor capital by $15,000. Number 2, increasing major capital land improvements by $21,000. Number 3, increasing transfer from capital reserves by $21,000. Number 4, increasing transfer from operating reserves by $15,000. And number 7, that 2021 draft budget for Function 238 Community Parks Area H be referred to the Special Corporate Community Services Committee meeting of January 25th, 2021. And I'll move those items. Seconded by Director Smith. Does anybody want one pulled? Okay, great.
Now I see why Director McGonigal isn't here.
I feel like I was set up, but we'll move on. Him and I will talk about that offline. But seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Moving on to CR5, Ms. Legault.
CR4, report and recommendations of the Community Services Committee meeting of January 13th. And staff would request the opportunity to speak to item 3. So perhaps 1 and 2 could go forward first.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Director Nicholson.
All right, your Community Services Committee reports and recommends that, number 1, staff continue the planning and analysis work to support implementation of interregional transit service between the CVRD and the Regional District of Nanaimo, as described in option 1 of the staff report to the January 13th Community Services Committee. And number 2, that the annual operating agreement with BC Transit for the period of April 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021 be approved.
Thank you. And that's been moved, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Questions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault on number 3.
Thank you, and I'm going to pass it over to April Diver from our Emergency Management Division to speak to item 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Legault, and through the chair. We have just learned that Cowichan Tribes would like to be a part of this grant application. Originally, the grant application was going forward with our 4 municipal partners on the CVRD, and Cowichan Tribes has requested to join that application, and therefore we are recommending a revised motion, which is as follows: that a grant application in the amount of $161,150 be submitted to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Initiative for the purchase of emergency support services, electronic equipment, storage units, a second mobile unit, and delivery of training.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So I believe that's been moved by Director Yanni DiNardo and seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Okay, so I've got some points myself. I have Director Smith and Morrison.
Do we have any details on the Cowichan Tribes inclusion and what the document looks like for their inclusion? This sounds like a great opportunity, and I'd just like to have a further understanding as there is no document to support it.
Thank you. I'll put that through to Mr. Carruthers or Ms. Diver, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So there is a revised budget, essentially with the addition of the 6th partner into this grant application. We're just increasing the number of pieces of equipment that we're purchasing. So some additional mobile laptops, as well as supporting the purchase of a storage unit and a concrete pad so that they can place some of these supplies for emergency support services on the south side of the river. So there's a revised budget that can be submitted if required.
Thank you. Does that answer the question, Director Smith? Okay, thank you, Director Morrison, and then Marsh.
Question's been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that this is really, to me, quite a seminal moment that in terms of our efforts at reconciliation starting to show in practical ways. And I'm really thrilled that staff brought this to us, and I'm really thrilled that Tribes brought it to the CVRD. It's very exciting.
Thank you. That leads to my question through to staff. I appreciate that we've brought Cowichan Tribes into this application, but what other engagement was there with the other nations in our region?
So we have reached out to all of the areas and didn't hear back from any of the others. And it just could be that Cowichan Tribes is a little further along in their process with the Emergency Support Services program.
Thank you. And I appreciate very much that our staff reached out to our other neighboring nations. That's important. Thank you very much. So with any further discussion, I'm seeing none. I'll call the question on the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you for that. Ms. Legault, now I think we're on CR5. I was excited to get there. Ms. Legault.
Thank you. CR5 report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of January 20th.
Director Yanni DiNardo, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move 1 through 10, please. And I just have a correction on number 9. First of all, so these are grants and aid, so 1 through 10.
Thank you. So I thought you were going to read them out, so I was running over to grab something and come back. But
no, I'm not reading them out. They're all in front of us. I hope that everybody's okay with that. It's 1 through 10, and I have a correction on number 9, if that's okay.
Okay. Go ahead and make the correction in number 9, and then we can.
I did have the $2,500 for the nature center. It's actually $450 for the Sea Squirt program and $2,050 for an outdoor interpretive signage. So the total amount wasn't just for the preschool program. It was divided up. I just wanted to make that correction.
Okay, thank you. Have staff got that? All right, and then the block is being moved as amended by Director Yanni DiNardo. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Back to you, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move 11 through 13, please.
That's been moved, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion on those? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is area directors only, and it's 14 through 21. I move those items.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Wilson. Discussion on any of those? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
That is my report. That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director Marsh, a question?
I just wanted to congratulate Director Yanni DiNardo for the shortest going through of one of the longest committee agendas I've ever participated in. Well done.
Thank you. Moving on to SR2, because we've already dealt with SR1, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Report from the Legislative Services Division. on setting a date for the parcel tax roll review panel. And the recommendation is that the parcel tax roll review panel sitting be scheduled for Wednesday, February 17th, 2021 at 12:30 p.m. to be held virtually via the CVRD Ingram Street office.
Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Duncan, and discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
As another staff report from Legislative Services on virtual meetings and live public participation, and the recommendation proposed is 1, that virtual board, select, and standing committee meetings be continued, and 2, that live public participation and public input period and question period for virtual board, select, and standing committee meetings be implemented as outlined in option 1 of the staff report.
Thank you. Is that moved by Director Acton? Okay, and seconded by Director Wilson, and discussion. I just wanted to make some comment based on some of the feedback from the public, and I'll go around the directors. I think I saw Directors Nicholson, Salmon, Marsh. Did I miss anyone? I didn't. I think we're trying to find a balance. So those were some good comments at the beginning. But I will say that there has to be some limits. I think it's always, sorry? Sorry. I guess I couldn't figure out who was cutting me off. Was there a point of order? Did I do something wrong? No? Okay, I'll continue. You know, it's always about balance. I think that there's limits to public input, just like there would be at an in-person board meeting. I respect that people have challenges possibly with technology. So I think that there's some good, the committee and the board chair can make some decisions during that public input. But unfortunately, if somebody sends an email in, but we have more than the allotted time of live in-person public input, you know, I think it's really up to the committee or the board to decide how they handle that. If they either extend the public input period to allow additional submissions to be read, or those are forwarded on to the board. Again, my personal comments, I've always maintained that last minute input on items on an agenda is not the way to influence decision makers, that the best way to do that is to send an email well in advance, if possible, to help them give them the opportunity to think through it. So I would always recommend get as much input as you can as far in advance as possible to your board members so that they can really consider that in the decision-making process. And I know that I will, as chair, and I believe the committee chairs will do whatever we think is reasonable to help support good engagement and community input and question period. But I'll turn it over. I have Directors Nicholson, Salmon, and then Marsh, I believe, on my speakers list, and then Acton. Sorry if I missed you.
So I guess I'd like to speak to that. I would like clarification on whether in our policy, which allows us to extend the period, is still going to be possible, and that people, if they, I don't know, will they be advised if they've made it, they're the first 5 or the first 10 or whatever, so that they can write in their submission if they can't, because I really appreciate getting a cross section of what the community's thinking on topics. I don't want to miss anything.
I could put that through to staff. I believe the policy allows the board or the committee to extend public input or question period by a resolution. So I think that would remain. I see staff nodding, but if you can just provide us further clarity on those questions.
Well, again, it will depend on how the board chooses to proceed in this way, but if we are limiting the number of submissions to 5 for live public participation, in theory, each of those participants would have 3 minutes, which would be the full 15-minute submission. So if you wanted to allow one of those speakers to speak for longer, but it wasn't anticipated to, you know, if we received 10 requests for public input period, to facilitate meeting management, putting some parameters around the number of participants would be helpful for staff to manage the meeting.
Good point. Thank you. Go ahead, Director Nicholson, follow up.
Yeah, I think we have to think this one through, because I think the people who would like to participate need to know in advance if they will be able to, because you know, otherwise they may choose to watch this later. So I think we have to make it, reasonable for everyone.
Yeah, I think the challenge is it's just like people who show up for a meeting, right? There's no guarantee that if they're 10 deep in the speakers list for public input, that they'll be allowed to speak. So I don't know. Suggestions are welcome. Go ahead.
I know, and that's the challenge, but it also, there are sometimes we could get a very contentious issue, like the estuary thing or something, or motorsport thing, or whatever it is, something as contentious as that. And it would be a real shame to limit it because we weren't able to accommodate. So I just think we need to be flexible and figure out ways of managing this ahead of time.
Okay, so I'll take that as a good comment. We can think on it, but I would suggest that a solution to that issue might be a way for us to help shape the discussion. And I do recognize that we've moved and seconded the option, so an amendment would be necessary, but I'll keep my eyes open for that amendment to be forthcoming. I think I have Director Salmon and then Marsh and then Acton.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just a question about question period. I was thinking about this particularly with my chairing debut earlier today, but I believe our policy says that only the chair can respond to questions, but I'm thinking that, in the case, or I was thinking today, if I got a question about the climate adaptation plan and drinking water policy, I'm sure that staff would know and I might not. So I'm wondering if it's within the chair's latitude, if he sees a staffer wanting to, volunteering to answer, if that's fine. I think it would improve our public service and responsiveness if we could just make that decision on the spot.
I'm taking that as input, or is that a question for someone in particular?
I'm just making sure that's okay if the chair decides to do that.
I would put that through to staff. I know in the past they've felt put on the spot by unexpected questions kind of tossed over to them, but I would put that over to staff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have mixed feelings about that. Clearly there are the odd question that come up that staff can very easily answer. We have the answer, but often that has been the experience that there's been some fairly controversial questions or questions that staff haven't been prepared for and are expected to answer on the fly, and that's not a good practice. So I wouldn't mind chatting with the board chairs about a process to deal with that, because I appreciate what Director Salmon's saying is that, if we can simply answer a question for the public, it makes it easier. So it would have to allow staff to have some discretion on whether they feel comfortable answering that question at the time in a brief way, or whether more research would be required. And I think we shifted the pendulum to just the chair answering the questions so that staff weren't put on the spot in those occasions.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and just an observation was municipally, we had this issue where staff were accounting for significant overtime waiting for question period. So for example, their item would come up at the beginning of a council meeting and then 4.5 hours later, question period comes, and there was some expectation that they would remain for another 4 hours past their item. Meanwhile, the municipality was being charged for that staff time where they couldn't be doing either other duties or going home for the evening. And that was putting a significant burden on the resources of the municipality just to pay staff, just in case a question came forward on their item that came up at the beginning of the agenda. So it's just another consideration when we look at those bigger issues. And I've always said, if the goal is really to get an answer, the fullest answer they could possibly get isn't necessarily from anyone at question period, is actually to have them get a fulsome response via email. So it just becomes the question, is it about answering the question and getting an answer, or is it about an opportunity to express some feelings in a public meeting, right? So that being said, all good information. I have Director Marsh, then Acton, then Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know why I'm challenged about muting and unmuting. I agree with what Mr. Carruthers said. I'm sure that the chairs and the staff can come up with a smooth way that the chair can answer a question even if they don't know the answer, and that the public can get a fulsome answer. I'm very appreciative that this report allows for video coming in as well as phone calls. And I wondered what it meant by real time back and forth. Okay, I'm trying to find that place. Real time question and answer. I guess that's, I don't know who would answer that, but I guess that's at question period.
It's
If
live.
it's on the phone or it's live, they
It's
get
real
the
time.
answer just like if they were in the room.
Yeah, I would put that through to staff, but that was my interpretation.
Okay. So the last thing I would say is just, I have a different view than Chair Stone about the public giving information at the last minute not being the best time to do it, because I have this thing that I learned from the former executive director of Warmland, that there's pockets of brilliance everywhere. And when we come here, hopefully we haven't been talking beforehand about how we're going to vote, and we listen to each other's viewpoints, and sometimes it changes what we're thinking. And I think that our public deserves that same respect, because any one of them in any election could end up being at this table. So if they at the input period have an idea that is like a brilliant pocket of brilliance, I would think that we would, be swayed by that if it made sense to us as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm always loath to respond to others' comments, but I said always the more time we have to consider it, the better. I've never been against question period nor public input. Just the more time we have to consider points of view, the more time we can incorporate it in our decision making. All right, moving on to Director.
Can I reply to that, Mr. Chair?
Sorry, Director Marsh, I know that again, you made a statement about my statement, but you mischaracterized my intentions, and I was just clarifying that. Thanks.
Well, I wanted to clarify okay, that's okay.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm asking myself some questions with the perception that I understand that, I respect that we have people who want to come to our meetings. But then I'm asking, what is our goal here? And I'm also asking, are we just creating more ways for the same input? So that is a question I have. But what's our goal here? Is it to create more diverse public input? That's what I hope it is. And that's not I don't think this is going to accomplish it. If we really want to try and get more input from people, I think we can have a thorough discussion on that and figure out ways of how to get people interested in, and I can actually think of a couple different ways right now, but I won't share them because it's not exactly on par with the discussion. But I don't know if it was in the public comment or that, some people don't have email, but that is pretty much the only way people are getting agendas right now. I would highly doubt there's very many people who show up at the CBRD to look at the printed agenda. So people already have email. I just don't see it in here too, where we don't want to, I don't think it's good for us to be receiving an email, then the public input, and then the question, and it's just a constant, because in my opinion, we've already made some bad decisions around all of this by pressure to make certain decisions on the fly. So again, my overall is, what is the true goal here? And are we accomplishing it? And I think what our true intentions are is to create more public input, but this is not necessarily the way, in my opinion.
Thank you. I will note that it feels like we've had this Groundhog Day discussion on public input for a long time, and I would always appreciate that if people have other thoughts about how we can get more meaningful and varied public input, that we need to bring them forward, not just allude to an ethereal idea of how do we support better public input. So if you have recommendations, you can put it forward as an amendment to the resolution or whatever way you think might work better.
Well, so are you saying that our goal is to create more public input, or is it just to facilitate the digital forum for the same input that we're already getting?
Well, I don't know. I think from my perspective, and we all may have different perspectives, was to try and simulate the live experience as best as possible. And I thought that's what was delivered here. But if there is ideas that can better support, more meaningful public input, that the directors could always put that forward as either an additional motion or an amendment to the existing motion. So that's all I was saying.
Okay. Thank you. I do have ideas, but I don't feel comfortable sharing them right now because we're not in the process of brainstorming ideas on how to conduct business at the moment in a more interactive and way for the community to engage further community members. But when I'm happy to have that discussion with everyone when we're all on that page.
Okay, well, we can have further discussion about maybe if we try this out for a couple meetings and we reflect on how it works, we can look at amending it further. I'm not sure, but I have Director Wilson, I think, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I almost lost my train of thought with all the meanderings and wanderings that's going on here with the various bits and pieces. I'd like to respond, first of all, to Mr. Carruthers. There is no intention here at all on question period to put anyone on the spot. The intention is that if I'm the chair and I ask the staff, if there anybody here who feels comfortable with answering that question, sure, let them go. Why not? I'm not going to put you on the spot, and if they don't feel comfortable, they will say so. This is not a question of putting anybody on the spot. Public input is an integral part of this whole process, and any chance we get to give the public an answer straight away, I will take. And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. It's not the intention. I'm looking just purely for somebody with the expertise and with the knowledge who feels comfortable with answering a question which is put by the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have learned through experience, if you are a chair, that it is best to direct them to the staff that they need to speak to, that they could speak to one-on-one, because it makes it much easier and much clearer to do that. So it's not about not like putting people on the spot, or it's not insulting anyone. It's clearer if you're a chair that if I could direct that person's question to because I can't answer it, if it goes to the staff person that they can contact. So I don't see a problem. We're not trying to not answer it. It just makes it much easier than you get the exact answer from the person who has the knowledge of that question.
Thank you. Director McGonigal.
And as a chair of a very long committee and very pointed questions, I find it difficult to answer some of those on the fly. If I do not have the appropriate answer, I don't want to give an answer that is untrue or unsubstantiated. If I don't feel comfortable answering the question, I would encourage that person to contact the appropriate staff person for a affirmative answer through email. I believe that would be the best policy moving forward instead of giving the wrong answer.
No, I think that is the policy at present. If the chair doesn't feel comfortable with the answer, they can refer that to staff and staff can follow up with the question, I believe. But Mr. Carruthers, is that not the case? It's more about like calling on a staff member in the moment that may not be ready, but go ahead.
You're correct, Mr. Chair. And my comments earlier were span a number of years of doing this and having various issues come forward to the board. And there's many times that questions are straightforward, but there's often times where the questions are designed in such a way to create a certain amount of debate back and forth, and that's really where it gets awkward for staff. So if the person asking the question is truly interested in getting a good answer to the question, referring them to staff so that we can answer them like we would for anybody else in a controlled environment would be great. With that said, there are lots of questions that come up that myself or any of the senior managers would be more than happy to put our hand up and answer the question very briefly and succinctly. But it has caused problems in the past, and I've watched meetings where staff may not, and I didn't mean that any chair or somebody was putting staff on the spot, but it happens, and staff naturally want to respond, but they're awkward situations sometimes. And so we just need to be cognizant of that and find a balance between those questions that are better answered when they have time to research and give a thoughtful answer versus those that I could put my hand up as a CAO and very simply answer a question for the public.
Okay, thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. And also, when you've sat through 5 hours or 4 hours and you're not thinking clearly yourself, because I know we did have a comment, I'm not sure if it was email from a public, from a member, a resident, that said that the chairs are not knowledgeable enough, that they need to, you know, it's really difficult in these positions. So it's much better to give a clearer, I don't know, can I direct you to someone else, because you're now exhausted. So, you know, there has to be leeway both ways. And I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this? Director Nicholson.
Well, I'd like to come back to my problem that I'm having about the length of time if we have a contentious issue. So I'm assuming if we have just a regular, the people that are paying attention to our meetings who like to provide input at the beginning, that we can easily accommodate them with 5 people in the 15 minutes. And if we have any extra time there, I suggest that if we get written submissions, because it's nice that people have the option to either write in or to request to come in person, I suggest that we try and cover those in that period as well, because I agree with the comment of Ms. Kaufman. This is more about a community dialogue really than just a CBRD board thing. So that said, I guess I need clarity on whether the board is willing to, if Ms. Legault receives many requests, if we're willing to automatically move to 10 people as opposed to 5 people, extend it without, or do we ask people to put them on hold, or while we debated at the time? I'm not quite sure how that can be handled, but I think we need to be clear so people understand. And if we're changing our policy, be very clear about that.
Thank you. I would put that through to staff. I wonder if there's a way that we could say, you know, that we up the limit from 5 to 10 or whatever the number is, but let people know that again, I'm loath to start every meeting with a 30-minute public input period. Like, I know hearing the feedback about how long the meetings are already, but I wonder if we could say 10 people can register, but keep in mind that it's up to the board or the committee to pass a motion to extend it. Director Martman, I do have you on the list. I was just trying to clarify the question through to staff.
So as the person who facilitates the meetings, and knowing that the number of sound checks that we go through for applicants at electoral area services at the beginning of the meeting, I would not have the opportunity to do that with submissions for public input period. So anyone who had technical issues, we wouldn't be able to address them. Like the greater the volume, the greater the challenges for managing those sorts of issues.
Okay. Follow up, Director Nicholson.
So I understand that Ms. Legault could manage 5, but not necessarily 10 easily. So maybe we need to change our policy if it will not work for 10 people.
I think our policy that's recommended is 5.
Well, the actual policy on the about public input period has it that the board can decide to extend it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was thinking more about time periods, but Ms. Legault, I feel like this might be a referral back to staff again, by the way the discussion's forming, or we could possibly adopt these motions and continue to discuss other alternatives, because I feel like, like I said, we have had long discussions about this before, but I appreciate that we're trying to balance technical challenges. I don't know if staff, Ms. Legault, if you have any ideas around what we might be able to do.
So I also see this as an interim step. This isn't necessarily a long-term policy. This is something we're doing while, we're in this current situation with COVID where we're not even allowed to bring public into the boardroom for a meeting to, help those folks who don't have internet access and might have something to say. So I see this as an interim step, and perhaps it's an option to test the waters and reevaluate after we try this.
Thank you. Go ahead, Director Nicholson, you still have the floor.
No, I don't think I have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to Director Martman next.
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow up on this discussion then, if you go to the guidance document that was provided under best efforts, bullet 5, it talks about adjusting agenda and meeting schedule so that matters that are likely to be controversial or attract high public interest are the subject of a separate meeting. So I'm wondering if we're trying to make everything fit into one standard type of meeting rather than taking the ones that are of controversial issue and make them separate, have a separate set of rules, maybe 10 people, just so that, then staff can know, okay, this is the parameters and let's manage it that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like a special regional services committee on parkland acquisition.
It came from your mouth. You're brilliant.
So that's a good solution. Keep coming to the table with good ideas. But I wonder if that's, something we can definitely consider about specific heavy items, or that if we kind of flag an item as an important item, that it be scheduled as a separate meeting, and maybe we can talk about a policy for those special occasion meetings where we have a little bit more broader rules for public input. So we'll take that as under advisement, and we'll go back through the speakers list, and then maybe we'll come with a subsequent resolution to recommend that staff come up with another specific policy around special meeting agendas, which might be a good idea. I like feeling like we're closer to a solution. Director Marsh and then Smith.
Well, it's challenging for me to say what I'd like to see, because I hear Ms. Legault say it will be a problem for her. And I certainly don't want to make that happen. But I expect from the number of phone calls and emails I've been getting, the way the board's been jumping all over the place on the Parkland Acquisition Fund, that when it comes to that board meeting, either there's going to be, we didn't have this at that time, but if word gets out that we have this, I would suspect there's going to be people calling and trying to zoom in, however you do that, as well as perhaps writing. And, given that that was a people's choice by 82%, I really do think we need to hear how they're feeling about it now. Of course, that wouldn't necessarily be a select sample, so I'm not sure if I really have anything constructive to add at this time. So I think I'll just stop. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back next to Director Smith.
Thank you. One of the things that I think about is on our agendas, we have many items, and if people can sort of jump in because they're very focused on specific. And then we have time slots. Like, how do we decide? Is it one, if it's one item on the agenda and then there's something else on the agenda, is it read one for one item on the agenda, one for the next item on the agenda, and the next on the agenda? Or do we just pack all of it to the front for just one item on the agenda? So then we're not actually hearing from the community, we're hearing just about one item within a time frame. So I think there's some logistics need to be sort of worked out on how we work through that. And that's just something I think about, is something that might be really small on the agenda may have a very important input from someone in the community that we need to hear. And I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do recall a situation that we ran into that recently where we had a significant amount of input, but it was on varied items, and some of the items input was harder to get to. I think in that case we extended it so that we could hear it all, but that is a good point, that that we may miss items on other or miss input on other items if we don't get through it all. So I don't know if staff maybe think on that for a moment. Other suggestions other than extending the time period? I think I saw Director Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because I haven't been here all the time, and I'm curious, in the last 3 meetings, how many requests did you get? Like today's, it was what, 1 request? I'm just curious as to, like, are you getting 20 every meeting? If you're not getting 20, then maybe you should pass this and try it for 6 months.
Thank you, Director Duncan. I'll go to Director Morrison next, and then Director Wilson, and then maybe we can call the question on this one, or an amendment will be coming forward.
So I don't want to get into a lengthy discussion and debate about this, but I'm hearkening back to some of the first comments that were made around this discussion is, what is our purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And I too, like the chair has mentioned, I generally read my agendas on the weekend. I seek clarification from staff on Monday and Tuesday. If there's been emails that have been sent around by people that want to provide input to myself and the other committee members or board members, I read those over. I review the agendas, and that's my way of preparing so that I can give thoughtful consideration of the input that's provided. What I'm not understanding is this idea that we're now getting requests, or we have been getting requests, where the email is being sent forward to committee or board members, and the person is requesting that it be read out at the meeting as well. So are we going to begin to get people sending us an email so that we can consider it in advance, and then be, in addition, asking that they be able to avail themselves of the ability to live address us as well? And I just go back to the thought that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the province has said, do the best you can to accommodate people, keep open and transparent meetings. And I think what Director Martman brought up about, you got something contentious, go to a whole other separate meeting. But I'll say again, the best question that I ever had as chair at the end of a meeting was someone who had an application before us, and this woman got up at the end of the meeting and she says, well, I understand you're moving this forward. What happens next? It was a brilliant question. She didn't know what was going to happen next. And that was the type of question I think that was initially envisioned when question period came up. So I put that out there. Do we really need, the input provided from us 2 and 3 different ways for us to get it?
Thank you. That's a good point. Was that rhetorical, or should I go to staff for an answer? I think we are running into these COVID related issues, and like you said, usually it wouldn't be someone would attend the meeting and stand up to the podium and ask the question, right? So I can put that through for anybody who wants to comment. I just feel like I'm in the spin cycle here, going around the horn again and again. I have Directors Wilson and then Acton, I believe. And anybody else I've missed? Ann Marsh? Sorry, I may have to just cede the chair for a moment. I really have to go to the washroom, but I'll try and get through this item. Director Wilson and then Acton and then Marsh.
Oh, I thought I was going to be able to close on that one, but no, not to be. Never mind. Regarding what alternate director Duncan said just now, it's a good point that he's brought up there, the number of things that we've had, and really it depends on how contentious the problems seem to be. I mean, we know that we've seen people queuing up outside the boardroom doors to have their chance at public input, and other times it's the same people over and over again. So really there's no real answer to the question of do we have 3 or 4 or 20 kind of thing. It purely depends on the circumstances, and I hope that and I'm sure he appreciates that as well.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you. I'm going to vote against this, or I would like to see it deferred back to staff, because the technology side of it for staff is a real issue. Like we talk about being fiscally responsible, and we don't even know what kind of workload we're adding here. And it's so challenging when we have guests, actually, like during electoral area services, and we're already staring at this screen so much. I added up 10 minutes every meeting for the next year for question period. Just that delay is 24 hours of our lives. So for an electoral area director, so it's kind of like, I would like to see some of this electronic stuff reduced. It would improve our mood. It would improve all kinds of things, our decision making. But because when we start the meeting off and we're already completely drained by staring at the screen and just listening, I think if people have access to electronic to be here, and that's assuming there's no struggles with IT. Then what if they didn't get to give their input because they couldn't get on, et cetera, et cetera. But if they have that technology, they easily have an email, and I would feel so much more comfortable getting an email. I can verify some of the facts, because sometimes it's not always factual, not to disrespect input, but sometimes not everything has been considered. So at least we can see their point of view and have it ahead of time. And so I would like to just leave it as email. We're allowing the public to give their input, and they can watch the videos. It's very transparent. We're all very accessible. Any one of us can pick up our phone, they can call us or whatever. So anyway, that's my thing. I hope I didn't repeat myself too many times, Chair Stone, and thank you.
No, that was good. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I kind of liked Mr. Carruthers' idea that the chairs speak about it. I think that I've made my preference known over the years, but just to reiterate quickly, I think that if people want to take time out of their lives to give input to their local government or any level of government, that there should be a way for them to do it. And if it's impossible if it's too onerous to do it this way, maybe we do need to go back to emails. But I would remind you that there are municipal directors who may have meetings the night before a meeting here, or meetings a whole day before a meeting here. So I think if you're going to do it that way by email, in order for, I want to read the input, I'd like to have it a little bit even earlier then, because I can't always read all the agendas for everything I have to do that week and a bunch of public input. But I don't understand technology, and I agree with Director Acton that if it's going to be onerous and time consuming and stressful, there is that piece too. So I trust that staff and the chairs can come up with something that will give the public the message that we care about what they have to say. And I understand people get irritated with the same people over and over again. But if we stopped doing this, as I said earlier, we might miss something really, really important. So I don't think you it's kind of like when you're in school and the two people who are disrupting everything change all the rules, and it just doesn't seem just to me. So but I don't right now, having heard everything, particularly from the staff, I feel like I agree with Director Acton. I think we should have a look at it after they've had a thought about it. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Did staff want to maybe just comment? I recognize that what's on the floor is the staff recommendation. I just want to get clarity from staff if you're comfortable with this level at this point, or if you were more speaking towards the, expanding it further.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Sorry, I was just, the staff recommendations come forward. It's been moved and seconded, but there was some desire based on staff's comments that we wouldn't adopt this, but we would discuss this further. Are you okay with this baseline of 5 people to start out with from the technology perspective, or is it an untenable administrative burden?
I think I wouldn't have recommended it if I didn't think I could manage it. I mean, clearly electoral area services is the more difficult meeting to manage because of the number of applicants and such, but.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. This is on the motion that's on the floor. Oh, Director Nicholson.
Well, could I amend the motion so that we do review how well things are going in 3 months?
I was going to suggest you could either come right back to you for a subsequent motion on the review piece, or you could. Sure. Okay, I'll do that. Any further discussion or amendments on the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? Directors Morrison, Acton, opposed. And I'll come back to you, Director Nicholson, for a follow-up motion.
I move that we review whatever this is called, the public input and question period virtual changes that we've made in 3 months.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? I'm seconded by Director Marsh. Discussion on that motion. Director Marsh.
So it's been a bit confusing day. So I just want to clarify that what we are limiting things to 5 unless it's a contentious issue. And then we're going to either have a special meeting or do something special. Am I correct about that or not?
That was part of the discussion, not part of the motion. I'd put that through to staff, but I think, go ahead, Mr. Carruthers.
Yeah, that wasn't part of the motion.
Okay.
Majority of our meetings are manageable, and I think we will move forward with this. If we appear that we have a highly contentious issue, I would imagine that we'll be having a chat with the chairs and discussing a strategy for moving forward in those rare occasions.
Thank you. That was going to be my add-on, that I think the chairs heard that pretty clearly, and we can discuss at agenda review if we feel there's an item that should be separated out, and we could put that on a special meeting agenda perhaps.
Mr. Chair, any chance of a break, please?
Yeah, as soon as we get through this item, I believe, unless Director Marsh has a follow-up for now, I'll go to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Arbitrary deadlines drive me crazy. Can't we make a review upon the change of the public health orders? Makes more sense to me.
I appreciate that. I believe we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Is that an amendment that you're proposing? Okay.
Yes, I move that.
All right. So the amendment would be to not be 3 months, but when the public health orders are amended. Okay. So do we have a seconder on that? Looking for a seconder on the amendment. Oh, Director Yanni DiNardo seconding on the amendment. On discussion on the amendment, Director Sebring.
Yeah, I've been fairly quiet on this, but I wouldn't support the amendment because I think the object of the motion here is to review how it's going, and to say, well, we're just going to review this when the pandemic is done. Well, then we don't need to review it because we're back to our face-to-face meeting. So this amendment makes no sense to me. Let's have a look at this.
Sorry for clarity. I believe the motion was when public health orders are amended, which could be next week by the sounds of it. But my argument was actually the opposite way, was that we could have the public health orders be amended 5 times between now and summer, depending on how things go. So
that too.
I think that's the intention of the motion, though, is when public health orders are amended. Okay, so that is the intention of the amendment to the amendment. Any other speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Any opposed? Director Sebring, Nicholson, Martman, Salmon, Marsh, Smith, McGonigal, Kuhn, Duncan, opposed? I'll make sure Ms. Legault's got those names before we move on. Motion's defeated. Our amendment is defeated, so we're back to the main motion, which is the 3-month review of the policy change. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed? Directors Martman, Kuhn, opposed? Seeing no others, the motion carries. You got those, Ms. Legault? All right, so we will take a 10-minute break and we'll be back at 4:15 p.m. Ms. Legault, sorry.
I was just wondering if you'll be taking another recess after the bylaws before question period?
I believe we will, as per our policy up until the end of this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe we should wait. No?
Sorry, I definitely need to go to the washroom, so I'm taking a break. If you all get back quickly, turn your cameras on. If you're back within 5 minutes, I'll start the meeting again. Sorry, I need to step.
Or Mr. Chair, couldn't the vice chair just chair while you go to the washroom?
I think
Sorry, by the time you ask the question, most people had already left.
That's already, yeah.
Cameras live.
Thank you. Apologies for the break before pending break. I believe we are on item SR4, Ms. Legault?
That's correct. Staff report from finance on spring security issuing bylaw for information.
Thank you. Pretty standard issue. Any questions from the directors? Thank you, Ms. Soldera, for waiting for this moment. And I do not see any questions from the directors, so we will then move on. And thank you for attending. Ms. Legault.
On to bylaws. Item B1, CVRD bylaw 4344, Saltaire Water System Service Amendment bylaw 2020 for adoption.
Thank you. Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Big step. Moving on, Ms. Legault.
CVRD bylaw 4351, Couch and Base Sewer System Service Amendment Requisition Limit Increase bylaw 2020 for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Wilson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
Item B3, CVRD bylaw 4354, Cobble Hill Village Sewer System Management Amendment bylaw for first, second, and third readings.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Smith. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
And bylaw 4354, Cobble Hill Village Sewer System Management Amendment bylaw 2021 for adoption.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
CVRD bylaw 4361, Regional District Delegation bylaw 2021 for adoption.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Martman. Oh, sorry, moved by Director Martman, seconded by Director. We have a seconder on that. We don't. Okay. Oh, sorry, seconded by Director Wilson. I think we have speakers to this. Director Acton and then Salmon.
Yeah, I would like some clarity on this. This is pretty interesting bylaw that's somehow I do not remember all of the details around this, the report, or what exactly, what are we delegated, what power to who, and what? Some examples, please.
Ms. Legault or Mr. Carruthers, do you want to speak to it? I believe we had a report not that long ago, but maybe you can remind us.
There's also a report, Mr. Chair, attached to the item.
So this originally went to the Corporate Services meeting and received 3 readings at the last board meeting. It's formalizing our delegation of authority for expenditures that are currently contained in our procurement policy. It itemizes some areas around signing authority. I'm not sure if there's specific questions that would be better to address that way.
Thank you. And I believe there was some issues with us having a policy, not an appropriate bylaw. And this is why the bylaw was brought forward. Follow-up, Director Acton.
Yeah, so I guess I'd like some examples if there's anything that would have normally come to the board, but now it's not.
Go ahead through to staff.
Yeah, I don't believe there's anything that has changed. If you're referring to land use type decisions, those fall under a different bylaw. These are more administrative delegations around signing and purchasing.
Well, so a lot of purchases do come through us. So I guess you could give me an example of without this agreement, has it prevented it? Is it for yourself to have delegation and for the procurement officer to have the delegation?
Through the chair, we've always had that delegation. Our purchasing policy has always delegated authority. Very few of our purchases come to the board. Once the budget is approved, we have a procedure and process in place for approving and signing off on expenditures. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Ms. Legault. This is a very procedural bylaw. And it basically addresses, it updates our existing bylaw and takes some things out of policy and puts them in bylaw that were previously in policy. But go ahead, Ms. Legault.
Yeah, I agree with the CAO, and it is a requirement that these delegation of authority for expenditures be contained in a bylaw.
Thank you. That was my recollection, was that we were doing it by policy and it rightly needed to be done by bylaw under that it wasn't a change in the policy, but actually just putting it into an appropriate bylaw. But that would be my recollection of the report that came forward previously. Any further questions for Ms. Legault from Director Acton, and then Director Salmon's next? Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was sort of in the same vein. I was just wasn't sure how big a change this really was, although it does seem like it's something that could come back to haunt us in future if we didn't really go over it. And I remember from, I believe Director Sebring said they had one in North Cowichan. I'm surprised we did not. So, but for example, signing authority, I see now we're delegating the, say, collective agreements and severance agreements, although I don't remember those coming specifically to the board. Anyway, for example, severance agreement, I don't think I've ever seen one. So
no, because they were part of the policy. It's just that now they're included in the bylaw as legislatively appropriate. So I think that was why it wasn't in there before. But
and then go ahead, Mr. Gross.
Well, Mr. Chair, yeah, we went through this bylaw in quite a bit of detail when we brought it forward for the committee to consider. When you're talking about things like collective agreements, obviously the board approves the ratification of a negotiation with our union. The delegation bylaw simply authorizes staff to sign the finished agreement on behalf of the CVRD. Those are the types of matters that we're talking about here. So there is nothing new. It is basically an updating of our delegation bylaw, which we're required to have. We've simply reviewed it. It's been many years. We've updated the numbers. We've moved some items from policy into the bylaw. But I can assure you that there's nothing new or anything that's going to come back to bite the board as a result of this bylaw.
Okay, just one follow-up.
Go ahead.
So from that, I understand. So for example, we take expenditure limits for goods and services. So what you're saying is we already had a policy that said anything over 100,000 had to come to the board, because that's what it's going to be after this bylaw.
No, Ms. Legault, I think you can, I don't have.
Yeah,
No,
specific
anything-
info.
Sorry to interrupt, anything over $100,000 rests with the CAO.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would recommend that if the committee would, or the board wants to look at this, I know we're here on adoption. We did have a staff report. I can't remember how many meetings ago, but I believe it was only maybe 3 meetings ago that staff could bring it back. But having gone through it in detail at that time, I don't feel the need, but if directors do, they can make a referral back and we could bring that report back again to the board. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I recalled it that anything up to $100,000 was signable by the CAO. If it is anything over $100,000, is there a limit?
Through to staff.
There's not currently a limit.
Yeah, I think that it would probably be wise to have another look then, because I mean, could it be $2 million or $3 million? I mean, I doubt that. I know Brian would never do that without bringing it to the board, but we're making a bylaw that his successor will be able to utilize. So I think it deserves deeper thought, certainly on my part, because I misunderstood it and I apologize for that. I thought it was up to.
Sorry, Director or Mr. Carruthers, you're muted, so I think you're trying to respond, but.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair, thank you. This delegation bylaw is consistent with what any other local government would do in terms of expenditures. The board's power essentially is in prescribing the budget. And once that budget is prescribed, we have checks and balances throughout our financial system to ensure appropriate expenditures through our chief financial officer, signed off by the CAO. You know, you're welcome to bring this back for further review. I'm just going to suggest to the committee that there's nothing unusual about this delegation bylaw. It is fairly standard, and but by all means, if you're uncomfortable or want more information, you're welcome to bring it back for further consideration.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So I think I heard you say, Mr. Crothers, you wouldn't be signing anything that you hadn't already gotten direction from the board to pursue.
There's nothing that would come for my signature that wouldn't have been approved, and the chief financial officer ensures that. So
I've twice misunderstood, and I'm fine with it the way it is, and I will support it.
Thank you. I saw Mr. Kieber's hand up, and I think I have Director Morrison and Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to give the board a little bit of comfort, letting them know that no expenditures are incurred without that's not included in the budget already, that the board has not already approved. So as Mr. Crothers mentioned, there's checks and balances in the finance department that prevents anything that's not already approved. And the ones that do come back to the board are items that have not been included in the budget. Sometimes it's prior to the budget's adoption, or something's happened throughout the year and there's been grant funding and there's new expenditures. Those items coming for the board. But other than that, as long as it's in the budget, Mr. Crothers and the staff have authority up to their limits.
Sorry, wrong button. Director Morrison and then Director Sebring.
So a quick question, given that we've been operating under policy and the likes to this point, is there anything that requires that this need to be accomplished in the next 2 to 4 weeks, or is it? Well, let me ask that question first.
Did we lose Director Morrison? Sorry, I think you cut off at the end. I couldn't hear you at the end there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So my question was, is this time sensitive? I realize it's got first, second, and third. But could we continue to operate at relative low risk for a period of time where this could be reviewed after we've adopted the budget? Budget's February 10th.
Through to staff.
I'll answer that. There's nothing urgent. No, you can't. We've been going on so long as it is, but it is something that we do need to become compliant with and should do eventually. We can wait to the adoption of the budget.
Thank you. Director Morrison.
So I'd move that this item be referred to the next board meeting with bring back the report following the adoption of the 2021 budget.
Do we have a seconder for that? Director Salmon. Discussion on the motion.
I think you have a motion on the floor. Don't you?
It's a referral motion though, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so a referral motion is in order. So this is a referral back to staff and it'll be brought back after the timeline, which is after the adoption of the budget. So again, I had a speakers list of Director Sebring. Did you want to speak to this referral? Nope. Okay. And to the referral, Director Marsh.
Yeah, I won't be supporting the referral because now I have it clear and I'm remembering back, and I think that we're gonna do it anyway, so I'd rather not rehash it again.
Thank you. Okay, so on the referral motion, seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Directors Nicholson, Sebring, Kuhn, Yanni DiNardo, Marsh, Smith, McGonigal, and Duncan and Stone opposed. I believe the referral fails. But Ms. Legault, if you got that.
So can I go back to moving the main
If you
motion?
could just wait for Ms. Legault to respond.
I believe I recorded 8 names, Nicholson, Sebring, Kuhn, Yanni DiNardo, Marsh, Smith, McGonigal, and Duncan.
And Stone.
Stone.
So that's 9. So the motion fails. I'll go back to the previous speakers list. I had Director Sebring and then Director Marsh, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting. I'm a bit surprised that there's no limit on the CIO signing authority, and maybe I wasn't paying attention because I know in the North Cowichan context there are limits. Some stuff does come to council. Big tenders, for example, come to council for awarding. I mean, Mr. Keever said, Mr. Carruthers and his staff have authority up to their limits. What is Mr. Carruthers' limit? And this has nothing to do with trust. I'm just trying to figure out process here.
So I can maybe turn that over to staff, but when a budget is set for a project, if the tender comes in within budget, it's up to them to be able to sign it, but I don't know if staff can provide more detail.
Well, and that's correct. I believe what Mr. Keever was referring to is staff below me have limits. I am the ultimate signing authority for the organization, and provided that the budget is approved by the board, I have the signing authority on behalf of the organization to sign off on any of our invoices. Other staff below me have limits, which is what requires things to come to me for final signature.
So to be clear, your limit is what is set by the board in the budget.
Correct.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Not like the parkade in Prince George. Sorry, that's what I keep thinking about. But I think I have Director Marsh and then Director Salmon.
Yeah, I have nothing new. I think that we should support this now because we're going to support it next time after another long conversation.
Thank you. I believe I have Director Salmon next.
Yeah, thank you. So just for comfort, so is this based on a template from other local government, or how did we come up with these 3 pages of legalese?
Through to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did review delegation bylaws from a number of other organizations and discussed it thoroughly on several occasions with the senior management team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor and opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Next item is B5, CVRD bylaw 4364, Thetis Island Wharf Service Amendment Requisition Limit Increase bylaw 2021 for adoption.
Moved by Director Smith, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Item B6, excuse me, CVRD bylaw 4368, Security Issuing bylaw Spring 2021 for first, second, and third readings.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Morrison. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
And CVRD bylaw 4368, Security Issuing bylaw Spring 2021 for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, sorry. Yes?
I don't, maybe I missed it, but when we went through B3, I think we only voted on the readings. I don't know if we voted on the adoption. Did I miss it?
We did vote on the adoption. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, where are we at, Ms. Legault? Is this the adoption of B6?
I think I think you've called the result of that one.
Okay. And so that means we're moving on to question period?
Correct.
Thank you. 10-minute recess. Please make sure you send your emails into legislativeservices@cvrd.bc.ca. And we will be back, or I definitely will be back at 4:43 on the button to go through those questions. Thank you.
We're live.
Okay. So I'll have question period, Ms. Legault.
The first submission is from Devin DeGroot. I believe it would be a good idea to require that all questions submitted to be responded to completely and fully, but not necessarily in the meeting. For example, if a question is not easily answered, it can be put off for a day or two, but both the questions and the answers be posted to the minutes or another forum. When a community member asks a question to your board, it's not just the member who needs to hear the answer, it is often the whole community who is interested in the answer.
Thank you. I think that I can't make any commitments from this chair, but I know we will review the progress of this new system. And I guess we can take that under advisement, and the directors can bring forward ideas such as that in the future.
The next submission is from Cliff Evans, and it's kind of a series of questions all about the same thing, but so I'll read them as a group. Do you not have a great amount of knowledge in front of you that is not being used? Isn't the sum of the knowledge of the group always more than any one person in the group? Why not use all the directors and staff if they happen to be present to help answer the questions, and if they can't, just say so and get the answer for the public for the next meeting? Didn't the board ask us to send questions in advance of the meeting and then a director complains about it? What do you want?
I can't represent all the varying viewpoints of the different directors around the table. I can only speak to the policies that we've adopted. The policy we have now is as it's been adopted, and we hope that will support better public input. And I appreciate Mr. Evans' point of view, but I can't speak to individuals, directors' opinions. Once we've made a decision as a board, we all work together as a board and support those decisions.
There are no further submissions for question period.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll see how the new system goes. And we're always looking for input. So you can always email the board at board@cvrd.bc.ca, I believe, on any items of concern within the region. And we'll all see those and be able to take that advice and input or questions accordingly. Thank you very much for that. And I believe, Ms. Legault, that takes us to adjournment.
A motion to close the meeting?
A motion to close the meeting, moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Wilson. All those in favor? And opposed? None opposed. We are adjourned. I believe